Despite the fact that the country may be in lockdown as a result of the coronavirus pandemic and the directive that most civil servants stay at home, governance has not been at a standstill. With technology as an enabler, some government officials have continued to run their offices through video conferencing apps as well as social media apps such as Twitter, Facebook, and Google+. In this next report, our technology correspondent, Victor Matthias, takes a look at how technology has aided the virtual governance model adopted by some officials in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic.
In light of the coronavirus, some governments all over the world have been forced to ask their staff to stay back at home. That doesn't mean that governance has stopped. However, governance has continued not physically or face-to-face. Governance has continued via the online platforms as well as social media platforms. Even before the lockdown directive of the federal government in some states, operations were skeletal as the need for social distancing and the advice to stay home and safe heightened. In order not to let governance fail, some government officials moved their operations online. Executive Council meetings in some states have been taking place via video conferencing, even as Vice President Yemi Osinbajo from self-isolation holds a Google Plus Hangout instead of a meeting, earlier scheduled with young innovators. However, have these virtual meetings been effective?
You have to remember that these individuals are working around the clock. There is the limitation of a 9-to-5 culture is completely out of the window. What matters is outcomes and productivity. And that can happen at 12 midnight, it can happen at 1 a.m., and it can happen at 2 a.m. So rather than jumping into your car and taking a drive to Alausa, all you need to do is click a button and you're on Google Hangout and you're on Zoom, and you can interact with the governor, you can exchange notes, and progress is made at every minute of the clock. So I think that technology has moved governance a step further to the extent that it's brought governance closer to the people and to the extent that it will enable transparency going forward.
I think we should have been here all along, long before coronavirus. We should have normalized virtual meetings. I personally do not think that people have to meet physically to have effective meetings these days. And it's a good thing that somehow, some way, this would be one of the benefits of this crisis, where we get to see that it's okay and normal to have meetings on Zoom and related platforms.
That is not to say some sectors have not been left out.
Some industries, of course, have suffered because you might need a bit of physical interface for you to carry out certain tasks and assignments, maybe in engineering, maybe in construction and what have you.
Virtual meetings is the new normal and will remain so until the pandemic is over. For those yet to be on board, now is the time to embrace the technology so as not to paralyze governance in a bid to avoid contracting the deadly virus. Victor Matthias, Channels Television News.
After the president's speech tonight, families and businesses who live or work in Lagos, Ogun, and the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, could be apprehensive. The president said that the extension of the lockdown in these states and the FCT is essential. Some families are, however, concerned about the essential things they need to survive the next 14 days. What are the other insights from the president's speech and what indicators will determine when the lockdown will really be over? To analyze the president's speech and what else should be done to make life more comfortable for families is our data analyst, Babajide Ogusowo. A pleasure having you with us on the News at 10.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, how would you summarize the president's speech tonight?
You know, I'd like to take it from three ways. To look at the similarities between this speech and the speech of last 2 weeks. The second thing we should look at is to look at why did he extend for the next 14 days. And finally, we'll look at what next for Nigerians. The first, similarities. This speech, like the last, was exactly 19 minutes, 3 seconds. In this speech, we also see that the president is really caught in between protecting lives and preserving businesses. What do I mean? In the last speech, he had used the word lives twice. He had used the same times, used the word business as well, businesses twice. In the last speech, 2 times he had used the word lives. They had used businesses twice as well. In the speech tonight, they had used the word lives thrice, and he had also used the words businesses thrice. So just like the last speech, we see that the president is really caught in between protecting lives and preserving businesses. And the third similarity is the president made it clear that this decision was not just his. It was based on the recommendations of medical professionals and experts. So clearly we've seen the similarities. Now let's look at why he extended. Now there are three reasons why the president extended. The first reason, Lagos. Now what do I mean by Lagos? Tonight we've seen the new cases, 343 confirmed cases since that first case on the 27th of February. But Lagos accounts for 55% of the cases. That's the first thing in front of the president. The second thing in front of the president is that information about Lagos. You know, in Lagos, based on population density, there are 14,000 people living per square mile in Lagos. In Italy, only 500 people living per square mile, yet they recorded hundreds of thousands of cases. And so the president is considering that Italy has had worse challenges, even though their population density isn't as high as Lagos. Now, the final reason why the president extended the stay is, 2 weeks ago when he made that speech, if we look at what was put on the president's table, or what likely the medical professionals put on his table, if we consider that clearly, here's what you will notice. When the president made the speech, Lagos, as at 2 weeks ago, was recording an average of 2 cases per day. Now, Lagos is recording an average of 8 cases per day. That's quadruple what had happened 2 weeks ago. Now, if we look at these 3 reasons, you clearly see that perhaps the president really didn't have much of a choice by extending the stay.
So were you surprised that the lockdown was extended? Do you think the president had other options on his table he could explore?
We have to be concerned about families. But tonight, the president really had 2 options. The first option was to protect 208 million Nigerians on one hand, or preserve 42 million micro and small enterprises. That was a real option in front of the president. And based on his speech tonight, he's taking that tough decision to focus on protecting the lives of over 200 million Nigerians. So I wasn't really surprised, especially if you also looked at his last speech. He had talked about and had made it clear that other countries are taking even stricter measures. So based on the trends we had seen, especially in Lagos, Lagos being the epicenter of this disease, yes, the president perhaps had that tough decision, and the future would let us know if this decision to protect lives ahead of preserving businesses was the right decision.
Now, Babajide, let's wrap up this conversation. For families that live on a daily wage, what more should the government do to ease their pay?
This is the time for the government to rethink. The president has announced, yes, an additional 1 million people will be added to the social register to become 3.6 million. But based on the evidence and the exhibits in front of us, we need to have 20 million people on that social register. So the government needs to rethink. The government needs to rethink the relief program. How nutritious is the content of the relief program? And finally, the government needs to rethink the security strategy, especially policing, for the next 2 weeks. In the final analysis, I see light at the end of the tunnel, but we are still in the tunnel.
Well, with the additional 1 million households that have been included in the social register, do you think that will help?
It will improve it, but do not forget, based on poverty estimates, you have 20 million households that are poor in the country. So what we will expect is that we expect more contributions and more partnerships from the government. The government this time around needs to, more than ever before, rethink. And how do you rethink? You make use of facts. There are 3 things that I'll finally end with. What should the government do? The government should make sure that it minimizes the next and stops the next person from having it. If you're at home and you're listening, what should you do? You should assume that you have it. You should assume that you have the coronavirus, because if you assume that you have the coronavirus, then you will act more responsible and you will take precaution. And what should I do? I'll do what you've done, but I'll always be here to keep sharing the facts and giving the truth about the coronavirus.
That's right. Our data analyst, Babajide Ogunsonwo, it's a pleasure sharing your thoughts with us.
Again, there's hope. We see light at the end of the tunnel, but we are still in the tunnel.
A pleasure sharing your thoughts with us on the News at 10.